Good morning to everyone. Can you just take this time to greet one another with a good morning as well? Good day as well to everyone who's joining us with our live stream. Today, I'd like to expound a little bit about what I talked about last week. Last week, we discussed as a sort of kickoff for preparation for Sojourn, we talked about one of the distilled concepts that we have really tried to build over the past 40 years in Bread of Life, and that's called the Sojourn life. Diba? The Sojourn life where you go from a small life of not knowing God through God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, understanding how that affects our lives, leading towards the large life with God. So it's about that journey, and we talked about how sort of it looks like from a practical point of view. We used James 1, and we talked about how sometimes we must be able to find God in the ordinary places, di ba? Na sometimes we try to find God in big things, and the reason why we sometimes cannot see Him is because we miss out on the daily activity. The small daily activity that we know is also part of God's journey. So today, I'd like to expound on that a bit because we were talking about our faith walk. And I like the concept of a faith walk so much kasi sometimes that's our problem. When we think about faith, it's so hard for us to bring it down. From a conversational point of view, di ba? Tignan niyo yung katabi niyo, tanong mo, pwede ba kitang panampalatayaan, di ba? Parang ang labo no? You can't say, I have faith in you. Labong usapan. Kaya from a concept point of view, faith as we understand it resides in the mind, utak, mga paniniwala, beliefs about God. So it doesn't really translate kasi faith as we know it, sabi nga po, there's so many ways for us to understand faith according to Marcus Borg, whether we look at it as fiducia, as in katapatan, we think about it as and fidelity. There's so many ways to think about it. But the modern interpretation, the way we must learn how to understand faith is through trust. Trust. Diba? Kasi ang hirap sabihin sa katabi mo, I have faith in you. Pero, it's much easier, sige nga, harapin niyo yung katabi niyo, sabihin mo sa kanya, I trust you. Sige, sabihin mo sa katabi mo, I trust you. Parang hirap pa rin Wala nang tiwala mga tao ngayon It's so much easier to say, I trust you. Now, the concept of trust is so easy to understand. Alam niyo ano gawin niyo? Bigay niyo cellphone niyo sa kanya, tapos sabihin mo, mamaya balik mo sa akin Di ba? Trust. Now, ito lang yon, no? Recently, may nakausap po akong parent, and when we were talking regarding life, alam niyo po, isa sa mga bagay na napag-usapan namin was the fact that ang hirap bitawan ng anak, right? So, when it comes to parenting, we've been talking about this for years, di ba? Na we must not try to coddle our children, palambutin. Now, since the beginning of about like the 80s and 90s, nagkaroon ng isang concept sa parenting called helicopter parenting, no? Ang helicopter parenting, what that means is that you're always there. So, kunyari, you're in the playground, no? So, ang bata in the playground, ano ang dapat gawin ng bata? Siyempre, play. Now, we know, playground play as opposed to, let's say, Sudoku, yung mga ganon, is rough. Dapat maging rough. Now, there's a very interesting concept in Japan. Sa Japan po, ang daycare nila from the age of 2 to 4 is all unsupervised play. Meron lang mga tao doon na nanunood sa side. Ngayon, yung parents, minsan nakita niya yung mga bata, nagsimula mag-away. So yung parent, takbo siya. Tutulungan niya, ipaghihiwalay. Sabi ng hapon, wag, pigilan mo. Pigilan mo ang sarili mo. Sabi ng parent, bakit? Panuurin mo ang bata. Marunong yan mag-stop ng conflict. Hindi magpapatayan yan. So, sabi, according to the Japanese, we must learn how to deal with conflict, right? So, kids must have an ability to repair relationships. Now, sabi ng mga ang brutal naman ng mga Hapon. Now, ironically, the incidence of violent crime in Japan versus America is exponentially much larger. So, di hamak mas violent sa Amerika kumpara sa Japan. Sa Amerika, everyone is supervising everything. So, the concept is helicopter parenting where you do not allow your child to be able to experience life, yung unobstructed, is bad for you. So sabi niya, ang hirap minsan bitawan ng bata. Pero sabi ko, we must be able to do it. By the way, alam niyo po, there is a new type of helicopter parenting. Tawag na sa kanya, steamroller parenting. So alam niyo steamroller, yung heavy machinery na ginagawang patag yung daan, di ba? Lahat ng sinasagasaan na nagiging flat. That's a steamroller. Steamroller parenting is no longer just simply watching over the child. Steamroller parenting is lahat ng problema in the way, sasagasaan mo para sa anak mo. So kunyari, ito yung mga parent na pag binagsak siya ng teacher, ang susugurin yung teacher. Kasi, ba't mo binagsak anak ko? Parang, kasalanan ko? Parang kasalanan ko. Hindi nag-aral yung bata. Ito yung tipong magulang na pag magkaroon ng kaaway yung bata sa school, ang gagawin ng magulang, susugurin niya yung bata. Di ba? Kahit na matanda na siya at yung kaaway niya 10 years old, hindi niya tatantanan. Now, sige, sino may kilalang ganun? Di ba? Di ba? Minsan parang ang hirap. Now, they've found steamroller parenting creates a high level of anxiety in children. As they grow older, they no longer know how to deal with the problems of life. They become more fragile. So sabi niya sa akin, ang hirap bitawan. Hindi naman sa wala akong tiwala sa anak ko, pero wala akong tiwala sa mundo. So sabi ko, naiintindihan ko po yan. Di ba? But something so interesting about trust, sabi ko nga sa kanya, trust is impossible to find when it is observed. Ano ibig sabihin yan? Hindi mo pwede sabihin sa taong, I trust you, pero palagi ka nandyan, binabantayan mo yung bawat kilos niya. Hindi tawag doon trust. Ibig sabihin nun, I police you. Di ba? Binabantayan kita kasi wala akong tiwala sa'yo. Trust only exists when the person you are trusting is absent. Pag wala siya dyan. Now, that's the reason why, when we try to understand faith as trust, we must come to a realization about God. We want God to always be there for us. We want God to always be felt within us. We want God to always have our backs. Pinoprotektahan tayo palagi. And that's why we feel awkward when God brings us through suffering, when God brings us through trouble, when God brings us through things we don't expect. Because we ask, why are you doing this to me, God? What we don't realize is that it is simply a part of the journey of faith. Trust can only happen when God is absent. Paano natin pag-uusapan to na mas malalim? Now, if you have your Bibles, please open them with me to Matthew chapter 14. In Matthew chapter 14, we have a very, very strange situation here. Bakit? Matthew chapter 14 is split into 3 parts. The first is the report of the death of John the Baptist. Now, sino po si John the Baptist? Prophet? Now we're forgetting something. Pinsan siya ni Jesus. Diba? John was the cousin of Jesus. Now you remember, the story of how John the Baptist was killed was that si Herodias, the daughter of Herod Antipas, asked for the head of John the Baptist as a gift So pinatay siya at binigay siya as a gift to the daughter. So it was a very brutal death. It was meaningless. Kaya it was very shocking for the world, for at least the Jewish world, no? Especially so for Jesus. But after the report of the death of John the Baptist, something happens in Jesus' ministry that was very important. It was called Jesus feeding the 5,000. Does anyone remember the story? Of course, di ba? Yung nagpakain with bread and fish, yung bread and fish nangyari, minultiply ng Diyos, napakain libo-libong tao. Now, after that, di ba, comes a strange part of the Bible. I say strange kasi pag tinignan niyo po, no, mamaya pag-uusapan natin, ano ba ang purpose nito? Okay? So, read with me from Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 and onwards. Sabi po dito, immediately after the miracle, he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately, Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Now, here, makikita natin the very, very familiar story of Jesus walking on water. Pero, i-breakdown natin because it is one of the strangest happenings in the whole of the New Testament. Okay? First and foremost, when we try to understand, there is an intense reversal happening. Kasi kinakailangan natin maunawaan. Kasi, for example, di ba? Magtatanong ako, exam. Okay? Bago kayo lumabas, may grade kayo dahil dito. Di ba? So, kung pasado kayo, pwede kayo umuwi. Kung bagsak, remedial classes. Di ba? Handa na kayo mag-test. Ayaw nyo mag-remedial. Okay, sige. Tanong. Sino nagpapunta sa mga disipulo sa dagat? Hala, bagsak agad. Ulitin ko, Baka kailangan sa inyo English. Okay. Who asked the disciples to go out to the sea? Okay. Sino? Alam naman si Satan. Si Jesus, di ba? Now, if you can see, Jesus was the one who asked them to the sea. Next question. Does Jesus know there will be a storm? Sabi nung iba, no. Sabi nung iba, yes. Ano ba talaga? Diyos ba siya? Hindi. So kung Diyos siya, alam niya o hindi? Okay. So alam niya. So ulitin ko, sino nagpadala sa mga disipulo sa dagat? Tas alam ni Jesus. Okay. So next question, why? Diba? Kasi masama ugali ni Jesus, ganun. Habang kayo nagdudusa, dito lang ako sa mountainside sitting pretty. Ganon. Di ba? It's so strange. What a strange happening. Now, here's another reversal that we have to think about, no? Usually, when Jesus shows up in the New Testament, things become better. Di ba? When Jesus shows up, the dead become alive, the sick get healed, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the blind see. There's always a miracle of goodness that happens. Now, you know what's strange about this verse? Next question. Bakit natakot ang mga disipulo? Okay. Sige. Mahirap yung bakit, no? Mahirap ang essay. Kaya pala pag teacher, mahirap mag-teacher, no? Sige, gawin na lang nating true or false. True or false? Baka maraming mag-remedial dito. Natakot ang mga disipulo sa bagyo. Sige. Sino dito sabi true? Okay. Sino dito sabi false? Okay. Yung iba, walang opinion na. Now, saan natin nabasa na natakot ang disciples sa storm? Biglang, ano nga ba? Sige, pakita nga natin. Pakita nga natin sa screen. Okay? Ano sabi sa verse 24? Binubugbog yung bangka ng dagat, no? Now, sinabi bang natakot sila doon? Saan sinabi na natakot sila? Ghost. Hindi. Natakot sila kay Jesus. Clearly, it's being said, when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the sea, they were terrified. Now, that's very strange, no? Because usually when Jesus comes, nakakalma tayo. But in this particular instance, kinabahan ng mga tao. Now, you know why people are thinking na the disciples got scared of the sea, of the storm? Because this is the second time that this particular story is told in the book of Matthew. Now, in the story of the book of Matthew, it is very strange bookend, no? Pag binuksan nyo, Matthew chapter 1. Okay? Matthew chapter 1, they were introduced a concept that is very important when it comes to Jesus. It's called Emmanuel. Now, what is Emmanuel? Meron ba tayong mga Emmanuel dito? Meron. What does Emmanuel mean? God with us. A concept that is very hard to understand, especially if we connect it to the Old Testament. Kasi sa Old Testament, God is either there or not there. Diba? When we look at Abraham, God walked with Abraham. When we look at Adam and Eve, God walked with Adam and Eve. When they were brought out of Eden, they were in a place where God was not. When we look at the Ark of the Covenant is the representation of God. So kung nasan yung Ark, nandun ang Diyos. Now, bring that even further, when you listen to Elijah, di ba, in the book of Kings, yan. In the book of Kings, in a situation with Elijah, di ba, sabi po, magpaparamdam ang Diyos kay Elijah. So Elijah looked for him in the earthquake, in the fire, in the strong wind. And in all instances, God was not there. So in the Old Testament, there is a clear indication of times when God is there and when God is not there. But in the book of Matthew, it begins with a concept of Emmanuel, God with us. So a God who is always with us. Ano kaya pakiramdam nun? You see, the whole book of Matthew is an understanding of how it feels to know the God who is with us. Kaya nga the end of Matthew says, surely I will be with you till the end of the age. Pinakitaan niya na this is who I am. Me, as God, will be the one who will be with you in all times. Ito ang problema. Na-appreciate ba natin yun? And is that the right way for us to understand Emmanuel? Bakit? In Matthew 8, yun yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, no? In Matthew 8, the disciples were in a boat and Jesus was with them. Naalala natin yung kwento na to? Si Jesus natulog. Nasa bangka siya. And suddenly, a storm came and the disciples woke Jesus up saying, Lord, we are about to die. Doon sila natakot sa bagyo. So Jesus comes and calms the waters and goes back to sleep. At sinabi doon, who is this man? Nung pinakitaan po ni Jesus ng milagro yung mga disipulo, ang reaction nila, tagalugin natin kasi mas may dating. Sino ba to? Diba? Now when you say that, is that a symbol of faith? Or is that a symbol of doubt? Ha? Faith or doubt? Kunyari, may ginawa ka. Paggawa mo, sabi mo, you're welcome. O, di ba? Tapos sinagot sa'yo, sino ka ba? Ano reaction mo doon? Ha? Sino ka ba? Is that a compliment? Or parang masakit yun? Parang di nyo alam no? Siyempre, masakit. Now, when Jesus did that miracle, the disciples did not know what to do with it. So, Jesus had to teach them Emmanuel in a way that they will understand. You see, if there is something strange about this particular place in the scriptures, it is trying to explain how God is with us even in His absence. You see, sometimes our problem is whenever we go through difficult situations, whenever we go through trials, whenever we go through suffering, whenever we go through interruptions in life, our prayer is always, Lord, save us. Diba? Iligtas mo ko. What if God does not want to save you, but rather, He wants to transform you? Gusto kang palitan. Gusto kang baguhin. You see, that's how we're going to try to understand trust today. Today, we're going to try to ask two questions. The first is, what does trust mean for us? When we look at the story of the Bible, or of Matthew rather, we're trying to understand here what Emmanuel will mean for us. Now, there's a book that came out this year that's very good. It's called The Master of Change, written by Brad Stulberg. Si Brad Stulberg is one of the top performance coaches in the whole world. At sabi niya, ang kanyang bagong libro, which became a #1 bestseller this year, Master of Change, How to Excel When Everything is Changing, Including You. Paano daw tayo mananalo kung lahat ng bagay nagbabago? Now, talking about change, he talks about a situation where he was coaching someone. Sabi po ng mama, the ground was shifting beneath my feet, remembers Thomas, a long-time coaching client of mine. Things felt out of control. As was the case for many, 2020 through 2022 were particularly challenging years for Thomas, a 45-year-old father of two who works at a professional services firm. In the span of a few months, he was forced to work from home, lose his biggest client, start homeschooling his children. He saw his wife get laid off of work, lost an uncle to the coronavirus, and was unable to spend much in-person time with his father, who died of cancer at the beginning of 2022. So much change in such short period of time, it was disorienting and hard to keep up. Now, Thomas' story was common during the period in which a novel coronavirus ravaged the globe, leaving significant human and economic destruction in its wake. It disrupted how we work, play, love, grieve, and participate in our communities. Yan daw po ang nangyari sa nakaraan na 2-3 taon. You know, it's strange, no? We might think that we're past it, but sometimes, alam niyo po, nauhuli ko ang mga tao, meron pa po tayong PTSD galing sa pandemya. Kasi di ba, noong nakaraan na linggo, may 3 pirasong balita na parang na-concern ng mga tao. Unang-una, sabi nila, marami daw nagkakasakit sa trangkaso. Di ba? Noong nakaraan na linggo daw, dami nagkasakit. Pangalawa, nagkaroon ng volcanic fog. Yung Taal nag-alboroto na naman. Kaya dami-dami daw po sobrang fog at saka kung ano-ano. So ang pangatlong balita, dahil dun sa fog, nagsuspend din ng klase. Okay? Sabi ng mga tao, this seems familiar. Parang nangyari na tong episode na to Ano nang iniisip ng mga tao? Kinakabahan sila kasi noong 2020, ganito ang nangyari. Di ba? Nag-alboroto ang Taal, ang dami nagkasakit, nagsuspindi ng klase, sabi 2 linggo lang. Kaya yung mga tao sabi, hala, ito na naman ba siya? Lord, sana wag po. Di ba? You know, That's something that we're gonna notice about people. We think we got over it, pero actually a lot of us are facing it still with fear eh. Medyo kinakabahan pa rin tayo. Natatakot tayo, what is possible to happen in our worlds today? There's so many things that we have to question. There's so many things we're not sure how to face. Kaya all of us, bar none, just want things to get back to normal. Gusto lang natin bumalik sa dati ang mga bagay-bagay. Now, ang tanong, posible ba yun o hindi? Yan ang sinasabi ni Brad Stulberg. When we look at what this is called, the coronavirus pandemic represents what I call a disorder event. Okay? A disorder event. Something that fundamentally shifts our experience of the world and of ourselves and the world we inhabit. Sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. The pandemic may be the most recent large-scale disorder event, but it is certainly not the first, nor will it be the last. Sabi niya, ang tinatawag na bagay nito ay disorder event, an interruption in the way that we deal with life. Tayo daw po kasi, we normally have what is called an ordered life. What is an ordered life? Every one of us has a schedule. Correct? Now, sino po dito, almost, okay? Hindi ko naman sinasabi na 100%, pero almost, pare-parehas ang oras ng paggising, pare-parehas ang activity araw-araw, at meron mga oras to do certain things. Yan. Those are called, that's called an ordered lifestyle. That's the reason why sometimes, diba, ano ang reaction natin when that ordered lifestyle suddenly becomes disordered? Nasistress tayo, diba? We get angry. Tanong nyo lang yung katabi ninyo na ang normal time niya kumain ay 12 at dahil dito 2 o'clock ka nakakain. Diba? Usually, we have a preset eating schedule, a preset working schedule, a preset relaxing schedule. We even have a preset vacation schedule, a preset life milestone schedule. Di ba? Lahat yan meron tayo eh. Kaya when things like this happen, like a disorder event, we usually get very bothered. We end up wanting to go back to our ordered lifestyle. The truth of the matter is, sabi nga po ni Brad Stulberg, this is something that happens again and again. Tingnan nyo Sabi niya, communally, it means us as a society, not a decade goes by that we don't experience dramatic disruptions. Examples include war, the emergence of technologies like the internet, or more recently, artificial intelligence, social and political unrest, economic recession, and environmental crisis, all of which are intensifying rapidly. Sabi niya, ang daming nangyayari, no? Lahat to, nababago ang buhay natin. Individually, disorder events are even more common. Examples include starting a job, leaving a job, getting married, getting divorced, having children, losing a loved one, becoming ill, moving to a new town, graduating from school, meeting a new best friend, publishing a book, earning a big promotion, becoming an empty nester, retiring, and so on. Now ito, research shows that on average, people experience 36 disorder events in the course of their adulthood, or about 1 every 18 months. In other words, every year and a half, may matinding mangyayari sa buhay natin na magbabago ang paningin natin sa buhay. Now, can you imagine that, no? Matagal na panahon ba ang 1.5 years? No, it's not a long time. Usually, we want things to remain the same, no? We want things to remain the same because when things are the same, we don't have a problem with how to face it. But whenever something changes in our lives, it changes the way we face life. Nagbabago ang priorities natin, nagbabago ang mga isip natin, and all of these things end up becoming stressful for us depending on how we think. Recently, may nabalitaan po ako na isa pong career woman, okay? A fairly well-known career woman who spent her whole adult life becoming successful in work. Kasi di ba, for women, it is much harder to succeed than men. Bakit? Usually, hindi patas ang laban. Kaya para manalo ang babae, kinakailangan extra sipag siya. Now, strangely, this woman was able to overcome the odds and she became a very successful woman. Now, ang problema, ito po, no? Because she prioritized her career over her family, she got married about close to 15, 20 years ago, but she was unable to bear children. Kasi, lagi niya sinasabi, next time na. Now, syempre, matalino po tong tao na to, she prepared, okay? So, naghanda po siya ng mga egg. Okay? Pina-freeze ba? Tama ba? Freeze. Okay. Pina-freeze niya kasi panalo naman sa trabaho. Sabi niya, haharapin ko na lang to pagkampante na ako. When I'm comfortable with the way my life is going. So, ginawa niya po yun. Now, kawawa po kasi this woman succeeded so much in life. Ang problema, she's now close to 50 years old. Okay? And now, she has finally decided she's ready to have children. Ito ang problema. Because of the career that she lived, sobrang high stress, sobrang pangit ng work hours, of course, always on the go. So, ibig sabihin, ang tulog palagi suspect, ang pagkain palagi suspect. Ang nangyari sa kanya, she had several health complications. Lahat ng itlog na tinatanim sa kanya, nalalaglag. At sabi niya, ngayon ko lang na-realize, priority rin pala ang health. Sabi ko, grabe no, kawawa naman yung tao. Kawawa yung tao kasi when we think about it, there's something within her that wanted to win, no? Gusto manalo sa buhay. Pero, gusto rin niya maging magulang. Ngayon, nahanda na siya para maging magulang, parang inaaway ng katawan niya yung kagustuhan niya. And sabi ko, grabe, no? We live in a world where our priorities, simply because we have a plan in mind, is slowly sort of overtaking our natural bodies, di ba? That's why, there's a very big problem in the whole world, in the developing world today. Singapore has a population issue. Ano ang population issue ng Singapore? They no longer want to have children. Okay? Kaya they expect, by 2030, about 70% of their whole population will be seniors. Okay? Japan has the same problem. Starting last year, they have started to experience something called negative growth. Ang ibig sabihin po nun ay, mas maraming namamatay kaysa pinapanganak sa Japan. So they expect, by 2050, ubos na mga Hapon. Grabe, samahan nyo, natawa kayo dun ha. Hindi, joke lang. Di si Fernando po to. Decision nila sa buhay. Now, that's the reason why certain places are incentivizing relationships. They're trying to build a life where people will be incentivized to procreate. Sabi ko, grabe, no? Sa totoo lang. Gusto niyo makarinig na masama? Masasamang tao rin ba kayo? Sabi ko, siguro, kung ang Pilipino tumira sa Japan, atin na ang Japan in 30 years. Kasi kung sila ayaw mag-anak, ang Pilipino, anak ng anak. Sabi ko, isipin mo, no, kung 30 years wala ng Japan, sige nga, lipat nga tayo dun. Atin na yan in 30 years. De joke lang yun, syempre. Pero alam niyo po yun, we've come to a point in our lives where we have planned our existence. Now, buti sana kung health problem ang issue ng Singapore and Japan. Do you want to know the number one reason why ayaw po nila mag-anak? Lifestyle change. In other words, they like the way they're living. They like the vacations. they like having no obligations. They like enjoying life as it is. Di ba? Do you know that's also the reason why Japan, hindi po sila nag-aasawa? Kasi, ito po, no? Recently, may kausap po akong kapatiran po natin who's based in Japan. Okay? Now, in Japan, apparently, men and women can both work. Okay? But, when they get married, a woman automatically leaves her job. Sabi ko, tindi, no? Kaya pala ayaw mag-asawa ng mga tao. Kasi automatic, paano kung career woman ka, kung magaling ka sa trabaho? Hindi pwede. Tanggal ka, alis ka sa trabaho kaagad. So sabi ko, that became sort of too much for us. We have developed life to a point where our tastes, what we want, is engineered. Hindi po ba? Yung sa totoo lang, sino nagsabi sa atin gusto natin yung mga bagay-bagay na to? Sino ba nagsabi sa atin na dapat by 18, graduate ka na ng high school? By 22, graduate ka na ng college? Dapat by 30, kumita ka na ng first million mo. By 32, dapat may anak ka na. Yung mga ganong usapan, sino nagsabi niyan? Bakit natin pinapaniwalaan? Now you see, that's why for a lot of people, we are carrying unnecessary stress when things are not ordered the way we think they will be ordered. In other words, nasira plano mo. Ang punto ni Brad Stulberg, you think you have plans. The only true thing about life is change. Every 18 months, nagbabago ang buhay. Now, recently, we started taking care of our child. Nanganak po yung asawa ko. And so, we have a newborn in the house. So, alam niyo po, ang hirap mag-alaga ng baby, di ba? Kasi syempre, ang baby, wala namang iniintindihang oras. Kung anong oras siya gusto kumain, anong oras siya gusto mag-number 2, kung ano man, siya bahala. Di ba? So, because of that, alam niyo, there's a lot of downtime na nakatingin ka lang sa screen. Kasi syempre, pag umiyak yung bata, hihintayin mong hindi umiyak. So, alam niyo, ang dami ko napapanood, no? Something na natawa po ako, I started watching older movies kasi parang wala na masyado magandang bago. Piling-pili lang yung mga bago. So I saw a movie that came out in 1999. Okay? 1999. Now, ito yung nangyari sa sine. Habang nagtatawag sila, bagong dating ang mga cellphone. Di ba? Yung mga cellphone nun, yun yung malalaki, yung ganon, tas may antena. Naalala nyo pa yun? O, di ba? Now, nung tumawag siya, tas sabi, the signal is bad. Ang ginawa niya, hinatak niya yung antena, humaba. Alam mo nung pinanood ko yun, natawa ako ng konti. Kasi sabi ko, grabe, no? Yan ang buhay dati. Di ba? Ang mga cellphone nung unang panahon, palakihan ng antena. Tapos, naging paliitan ng antena, tas ngayon, wala ng antena. Di ba? Sabi ko, it's different, no? Observing life in the past 30 years and how different it is now compared to before. If you told someone in 1999 that their whole lives will be spent on the phone, they'll say, why? Today, di ba? Most of us, we're guilty of overusing our phone. Di ba? Kaya sabi ko, grabe yung pag-reorder ng buhay, no? Kaya yun ang point po ni Brad Stulberg. When we look at it, sabi niya, look closely and you'll see that everything is always changing, including us. Life is flux. Now, if life is always changing, what must we do? According to Brad Stulberg, there are two mindsets that we must understand. Ang problema daw natin, we are homeostatic. Ang ibig sabihin ng homeostatic, this began in 1865 by Claude Bernard. Homeostasis comes from two Greek words. Homeo meaning same, stasis meaning standing. Life will always remain the same. Okay? That's for a lot of us. We always want to expect life to remain the same. However, sabi niya, it is wrong. Life as we know it will not always remain the same. So, sabi niya, we must have an allostatic mindset. What is allostasis? In the late 1980s, two researchers, one a neuroscientist, physiologist, and professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and the other an interdisciplinary scholar with a focus on biology and stress, observed an interesting phenomenon. In the vast majority of situations, healthy systems do not rigidly resist change. Rather, they adapt to it, moving forward with grace and grit. Sabi niyo, hindi tayo bumabalik sa dati. Rather, when things happen, we face it and we are reordered by it. Nagbabago daw ang ating buhay dahil sa change. This observation is true whether it is an entire species responding to a shift in its habitat, an organization responding to a change in its industry, or a single individual responding to a disorder event in her life or an ongoing process such as aging. Following disorder, living systems crave stability, but they achieve that stability somewhere new. Peter Sterling and Joseph Ayer coined the term allostasis to describe this process. Allostasis comes from the Greek allo, meaning variable, and stasis, which as you learned earlier, means standing. Ano daw ibig sabihin nito? It is defined as stability through change. So sabi niya, kung homeostasis is X, yun yung buhay natin, Y is the disorder event. So pag matapos ang disorder event, babalik tayo sa X. Ang allostasis daw is X, yan yung lumang buhay, Y, disordered event. Ang ending natin ay Z, somewhere new. Now, why is this important? When we look at it daw po, we achieve stability not by fighting change or getting back to where you were, but rather by skillfully working with change and arriving at something new. The key goal of regulation is not rigid consistency, rather, it is the flexible capacity for adaptive variation. Why is it important for us to have an allostatic mindset? Because we've believed for too long the lie of stability. We want things to go back to normal. But you see, there's a reason why things change. There's a reason why life always has interruptions. Bakit palagi nagbabago? Ba't tayo dinadala ng Diyos sa bagong hamon? Ba't tayo binibigyan ng Diyos ng bagong problema? Ba't tayo binibigyan ng Diyos ng bagong balakid? Bagong lalampasan? There's a reason behind all of this. When we refuse to go with how God is leading us, we end up in a worse place than when we started. Going back to the example of the phones, no? Ito, bagong labas, iPhone 15, di ba? Yung mga tao, kakabili na ng iPhone 14, gusto na ng iPhone 15 kasi bago daw. Eh ano daw nagbago? Wala. Very strange, no? It recently went through a structural damage test, and it came out it is the most fragile iPhone of the past 5 years. But for us, it doesn't matter because we have built a life that says every year you need to have a new iPhone. Now, going back to the example of phones, 30 years ago, which is 1999, di ba? Nung mid-90s and early 2000s. Ano ang kilalang brand ng telepono? Oh, di ba? Sino ba dito nagkaroon ng Bokya? Diba? Bakit Bokya? Kasi imagine mo, no? Once upon a time, it was one of the biggest companies in the world. Today, it is non-existent. Sabi nga nung CEO nila, we did everything right. But we still failed. Why? Because they resisted the change. Imbis na sinabayan nila yung pagbabago ng Apple and Android, the App Store, they resisted the change. Sabi nila, Nokia is Nokia. Kaya dati, big time ka kung may Nokia ka, may Motorola ka, meron kang Sony Ericsson, at meron kang Siemens. Now, tanong, nasan yung 4 na kumpanya na yan? They did not do anything wrong, They simply resisted change. You see, that's why ang point is, there's a reason why God is bringing you through what you're going through. For a lot of people, we think that it's something negative. But what if we're able to reframe it into an allostatic mindset na alam natin that change is inevitable, so we have to ask a question, where is this change bringing us? Si David Brooks, very, very well-known writer, professor, spoke in a TED Talk about 3 years ago about what interruptions do, no? Tayo kasi ayaw natin ng interruption sa buhay. Ayaw natin na napipigil tayo, ayaw natin na merong bigla tayong kinakailangan i-consider or whatnot. Pero sabi niya, we must understand what interruptions do. So, can we just please have this video from TED Talks? To him was he's a very, very successful person until iniwan siya ng asawa niya, until yung mga anak niya iniwan din siya, until he realized all he had were trophies and nothing to show for it. So na-realize niya, something must change. Ang na-realize niya, we are in a social and relational crisis. May problema tayo sa isa't isa. May problema tayo sa relationships. May problema tayo kasi ang prioritize natin was the lie of stability. Kaya ang punto niya, suffering has power. Because its great power is that it interrupts your life. But when it interrupts your life, you realize only spiritual and relational food will fill it. You see, why does Jesus bring the disciples into the middle of the storm? Why does Jesus or God want to bring disorder? Because we are afraid of disorder, but God is in that disorder. Nandyan siya sa gitna ng pagbabago. It just so happens, we don't recognize Him. John Corson, in his commentary, talks about how we have a problem with recognition when it comes to God. Sabi niya, fighting the Philistines in a brutal battle as the Israelites' losses mounted, so did their despair. Then someone had a brilliant idea. Let's bring in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, a box about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, was instrumental in tabernacle worship. When the Ark was brought into the Israelite camp, the Israelites cheered so loudly that their shout of triumph could be heard in the Philistine camp. But though the Israelites charged ahead with the ark leading them, they were defeated resoundingly, and the Philistines captured the ark. Akala nila, ang Diyos nandun sa Ark of the Covenant, that box. Pero dahil nag-overconfident sila doon, they lost, at yung Ark of the Covenant nanakaw pa. What is the lesson here? An obvious one. Ano ang sabi? The people of God should not have tried to put God in a box. What is our problem? We put God in a box. Ano yung sabihin? We know, di ba? Mga salita natin kasi we're guilty of this as well. We're guilty of putting God in a box. Pag may perang dumating na hindi inaasahan, ano tawag natin doon? Blessing. Galing sa Diyos. Pag may problema na nangyari, anong sinasabi natin? Ginajablo ko. Di ba? Pansinin natin yon. Either pag maganda, galing sa Diyos, pag pangit, galing sa jablo. Pero paano kung hindi? Ulitin ko sino nagdala sa disciples sa dagat? Si Jesus. So alam ka naman yung diablo yun. There's something strange here happening. Sabi niya, instead of looking to the Lord, they looked to the box and were beaten badly. If there's one thing many of us are learning, it is that the Lord works in mysterious ways. You just can't box Him in. He is predictably unpredictable. He comes at the unexpected time in the unexpected way. Here in Matthew 14, the disciples are out in the storm, toiling at the oars, continuing obediently in the directive Jesus had given them to go across the sea. And while they were working and perspiring, Jesus was watching and praying. He was letting them go through the struggle. Nababasa natin yung dilaw? Bakit? Sige, basahin natin out loud. Grabe, no? Knowing the struggle would strengthen them. Why are we being interrupted in our life by God? No, actually, the first thing we should ask is it really God? Diba? Minsan, marami rin tayong pagkakamali sa buhay But sometimes, it's God who brings us there because we've become too comfortable. Nasyado na tayong nasanay. Sanay na tayo. Paano kumilos ang Diyos? Kinakailangan natin ng something new that will introduce Him once again to us. He allows us to go through the struggle because He knows this is the next best thing for us. We're supposed to learn from it. We're supposed to become strong at it. Finally, at 4 o'clock in the morning, knowing that His disciples were feeling anxious and fearful, He came to them walking on the water. He came to them at the unexpected time in an unexpected way, and they, thinking He was a ghost, freaked out. So too, I suggest to you that many times, Jesus comes to us as well, but like the disciples, we don't recognize Him. And He talks about 4 reasons why we don't recognize Him. Why is it that sometimes it's hard for us to see God? The first reason is we are afraid. Fear and anxiety is the number one barrier. In Matthew chapter 14, as Jesus was walking on water, natakot po yung mga disciple. Now, anong sinabi po? Take heart, it is I. Okay? Take heart, it is I. Now, in a different translation, the words take heart actually is translated to be of good cheer. Okay? Be of good cheer. Maging masaya ka. Hindi pwedeng mauna yung pagpapakilala ng Diyos bago tayo maging masaya. You see, that only works if we don't know God. But when we know God, we must already know that God will be there whether we believe in it or not. Whether we see it or not, God will be there. So dapat daw mauna yung puso. Without the heart, God will not be seen. The second is false familiarity. Masyado na daw tayo nasanay with how we saw God. You know, this is the reason why sometimes, diba, when things happen in our lives, agad-agad haharapin natin siya. May problema ako, sige, magpe-pray ako. Okay, hindi gumana. Sige, magwo-worship ako. Hindi gumana. Sige, magfa-fasting ako. Hindi pa rin gumana. So anong gagawin natin next? Uulitin natin yung lahat. Kasi expect natin doon magpapakita ang Diyos. You see, it's very strange, no? When Jesus died, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb at doon po, she started crying, no? Now, when she started crying, dumating si Jesus, tinanong, ba't ka umiiyak? Because they have taken my Lord. Tapos biglang tinanong niya kay Jesus, are you the gardener? Ikaw ba yung hardinero? Supposedly, di ba kilala niya na si Jesus? You see, she could not see Jesus because she could not see Jesus as the gardener. We must be willing to see Jesus in a way that He is not normally seen. Kaya minsan yun yung problema false familiarity. Now, the third reason is personal tragedy. Bakit tayo nahihirapan makita ang Diyos? Our own suffering is stopping us from seeing Him. Masyado tayong kinakain ng nararamdaman natin. Instead of going out on a limb to trust, we are being carried by our emotions. And finally, it is despair. We lost hope. If we lose hope, it will be impossible to have trust. You see, those four things are stopping us from seeing God. And that's the reason why we must check with ourselves. Number one question, when we're going through something, is what's stopping us from seeing how this disorder event is going to reorder us fear? Natatakot ba tayo sa hinaharap natin? Number two, ayaw ba natin ng bago? It means we're always falsely familiar. Number three, hirap na hirap ba tayo sa nararamdaman natin? Or number four, nawalan na ba tayo ng pag-asa? You see, when we ask these four questions, we'll be able to wonder and think, bakit kaya hindi natin nakikita ang kamay ng Diyos sa pangyayari na to? If God is the one who's bringing me through this storm, am I guilty of any of these four? So ang bawat isa doon, kinakailangan natin harapin. We must learn how to be brave. We must learn how to see God correctly. We must learn how to get over our feelings. We must learn how to not lose hope para makita ang Diyos. You see, He will always be there in a way we don't expect. Meron pong lumang kwento, no? Tungkol sa isang debotong Kristiyano. Okay? He was a very, very devout Christian who believes all the time, if something happens to him, God will save him. Okay? Ililigtas siya ng Diyos. So, one day, yung buong village nila binaha. Nung binaha, nagkaroon na ng warning. Sabi, kinakailangan natin mag-vacate. Sabi ng mama, okay lang, God will save me. Okay? So, nagsimula umakyat yung tubig, umabot hanggang tuhod. Nung umabot na sa tuhod yung tubig, lahat ng mga kapitbahay niya, nagsimula na umalis, meron silang rowboat. So nagsisakayan sila dun sa rowboat na dumaan, pagdaan sa bahay ng tao, sabi, uy, sakay ka na, ililigtas ka namin. Sabi niya, no, God will save me. O, di ba? So, taka sila, ayaw magpaligtas, tuloy siya. Umabot na yung tubig hanggang bintana, hanggang dibdib na. So, hindi na kinaya. Mamaya may dumating na rowboat. Yung rowboat, sabi, may nanggaling sa bangka. Sabi, nandito ka daw. Dumating kami para iligtas ka. Halika na. Sabi ng mama, no, God will save me. Okay? Tuloy pa rin yung baha. Lumubog yung buong bahay. So, nasa taas na siya ng bubong. Pagdating nun, may dumating na helicopter. Yung helicopter, nagbababo ng hagdan, sabi, may natitirang tao dito. Halika na, dumating kami para iligtas ka. Sabi niya, no, God will save me. Okay? Sabay namatay siya. Nung namatay siya, punta siya sa langit. Hinarap niya ang Diyos. Sabi niya, ikaw talaga, Lord. Sabi mo, ililigtas mo ko. Hinihintay kita kanina pa. Sabi ni Lord, anong sinasabi mo? Nagpadala ako ng bangka, nagpadala ako ng motorboat, nagpadala ako ng helicopter, ano pa ba gusto mo? Yun daw ang problema natin. We don't see the signs that God is showing us. We are unable to recognize God. Why? Are we afraid? Are we falsely familiar? Are we anxious about our personal feelings? Or are we losing hope? No? You see, that's why trust is important. Trust only works when you can't see the person. Hindi mo pwede sabihin sa jowa mo, I trust you, pero binabantayan mo the whole time. Hindi mo pwede gawin yun sa anak mo. Na I only trust you while I see you. Hindi mo pwede gawin yun sa trabaho mo, sa kaibigan mo. Nasasabihin mo, I only trust you while I see you. And we can't do that to God as well. If we want to have faith in God, we must be able to say, Lord, I trust you even when I don't see you. And when I don't see you, then I'm gonna have to ask, is it really you? You see, if the first is, what does trust mean to us? The second thing we have to ask is, what is God waiting for me to say? minsan sinasabi natin, Lord, save me. No? But if you look at Matthew 14, bilisan na lang po natin ng konti. Ay, sorry. In Matthew 14, verse 28, anong sabi? Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. Tigil muna tayo doon. I don't want to continue towards the end. But you see, if the first thing that Jesus asks us is to trust Him, the second thing is Jesus is waiting for us to ask Him to. Out of the 12 disciples, 11 of them, kinain po sila ng takot. Kinain sila ng hindi nila makita ang Diyos. Yung isa, nagdalawang isip. Bakit? You know that Peter's trust is not whole. Bakit? If it's trust, dapat sinabi niya, Lord, ikaw nga yan. But you hear what he said, Lord, if it is you. So may question mark. Ikaw ba talaga yan? Di ba? If it is you, command me to walk on the water. What is God waiting for us to ask? To test Him out in this new thing. Lord, ikaw ba talaga yan? Kung ikaw talaga yan, paspalakarin mo nga ako. Now, ulitin ko, no? I said earlier that when Jesus comes, something good happens. The miracles of Jesus always have a good effect. You know, very strange. There's only one miracle na walang effect. Ano yung miracle na yon? Ito. Bakit? May napakain ba? Ha? Meron? Wala. May napagaling ba? Wala. Sa paglalakad sa tubig, may naligtas ba? Wala. It is the most meaningless miracle. Kaya nga sabi, it is absolutely strange. Para siyang waste of miracle eh. But you see, the point behind it here is not that what is the miracle. Diba? It is not about walking on water. It is about the absurdity of the request. Sobrang strange. Bakit? No one ever walks on water. Tanong nga, why doesn't Jesus just fly? Di ba mas madali yun? Lipad ka na lang. Pero bakit pinalakad sa tubig? You see, it's about trying something new. In our own journey of life, are there moments in our life na we are afraid to test God out on something new simply because it has never been tried? Simply because we have never seen God faithful in this way. May bago kang trabaho na ikita, ayaw mo harapin kasi akala mo wala ang Diyos dyan. What if God is simply telling you, walk on water nga, subukan mo? Meron kang bagong nakikitang oportunidad pero hindi mo alam kung totoo. What if God is telling you, subukan mo kaya? Hindi mo malalaman hanggang hindi mo sinubukan eh. Now, you know what's so interesting about this? Peter tried, walked a few steps, and then fell. You know why that's so interesting for me? Because that's exactly what trying is. Pag makakita ka ng bata, di ba, ng baby, nagsisimula yan, gumagapang, bago susubok maglakad. Pag magsimula maglakad yan, tumatakbo na ba agad yan? Di ba? Nadadapa-dapa, nalalaglag-laglag yan. You see, that's what faith and trust is. Madadapa-dapa ka, malalaglag-laglag ka. Minsan maglalakad ka sa tubig, minsan magpapasaklolo ka. But it just so happens that for many of us, we don't try because we are afraid to ask. Lord, ikaw ba yan? Kung ikaw yan, palakarin mo ko. Now, how do we know it's God or not? Simple. Naglakad ka eh. Kung hindi Diyos yan, lulubog ka. But you'll know it's God because you'll be able to do something that God has never allowed you to do. Something new, something good. You see, minsan dapat hindi tayo magpakain sa takot eh. One of the most repeated phrases in the Bible is, do not be afraid. Why? Our issue is, we're always afraid. But what if this circumstance, this disorder, this storm that God brought us in is a chance for us to walk on water. What will we do? Do we face it or do we turn away? You see, in this instance, God is telling us, what does faith look like to you? Faith, for many, seems to be a belief. But in Matthew 14, faith is as simple and as difficult as walking on water. Saang tubig ba tayo tinatawag ng Diyos? What's strange happening? What new challenge? What new thing is God calling us to walk in? It will be hard, but you never know. You know, as we end, allow me to show you this video of a company. Now, this company is very strange because it did not begin as a company. It began as one person traveling, enjoying life. In other words, bakasyonista. Now, itong tao na to who began this company goes to a vacation in Argentina. At alam niyo po, ang Argentina maganda kasi 'di ba sa Argentina maraming corned beef. Hindi. There's a lot of food, there's a lot of wine, there's a lot of culture. Ang ganda-ganda. So he was in Argentina, but out of everything he sees little children running, mga bata. At tumatakbo silang walang sapatos. At napaisip siya, kawawa naman yung mga bata na to. And that began something new with him. This company that he built ended up creating a program called 1 for 1. 1 for 1 is that for every product he sells, he will give one to someone in need. At dahil nakita niya ang mga taong walang sapatos, napaisip siya magbigay ng sapatos. So he creates a company called the Tomorrow Shoes, or what other people know as Toms. Can you please have this video? You know, that's the reason why I like Toms. It began with a burden. You see, it comes from a person wanting to enjoy life, and it ends with that life being disordered and reordered by God once again. What does trusting God in the middle of a storm do to us? It reorders us. It changes what we think. And it allows us an opportunity to walk on water. So hopefully, as we continue with our faith walk, we might have opportunities of walking on water. Something so difficult na hindi natin alam kung kaya natin. Something so strange, but biglang binukas yung opportunity sa atin ng Diyos. Hopefully, because of our faith, because of trusting God, these doors might present themselves to us. Let's all stand as we end in prayer. Panginoon, nagpapasalamat po kami sa inyo sa araw na ito. Salamat po, Panginoon, sa panahon na binigay niyo po sa amin upang magtipon-tipon at magsamba at makinig sa inyong salita. Salamat po, Panginoon, aming Ama, sa paalala, aming Ama, ng pagtitiwala. Minsan, aming Ama, mahirap po maintindihan ang pananampalataya, pero madali po maintindihan ang tiwala. Kaya Panginoon aming Ama, salamat po Panginoon sa bawat bagay na ginagawa po ninyo sa aming buhay. Minsan ang mga interruption na ito ay hindi namin nakikita as maganda o mabuti, Pero Panginoon, minsan aming Ama, itong mga interruption na ito ay nagpapakita sa amin ng kailangan namin sa buhay. Kung kailanganin po ba namin ng pagkain ng kaluluwa, pagkain, Panginoon, namin Ama, ng pakikisama sa mga tao, o Panginoon, itong bagay ba na ito ay ibabaguhin ba ang aming buhay? Papalitan ba ang aming mga priority? Aayusin ba ang aming mga puso? Minsan hindi po namin masabi. Kaya minsan, Panginoon, hindi po namin kayo mapasalamatan para sa mga unos at bagyo ng buhay. Dahil hindi po namin makita na kailangan lang po namin magtiwala sa inyo. Salamat po, Panginoon. Dahil, Panginoon, pag magtiwala kami, binibigyan niyo po kami ng pagkakataon maglakad sa tubig. Kahit minsan imposible. Kahit minsan parang hindi pa nangyayari. Kahit minsan hindi pa nakikita magawa. Pero alam po namin kung ang bawat isa ay may pananampalataya na kasing laki ng binhi ng mustasa, kaya po namin pagalawin ng bundok. Kaya Panginoon, alam po namin, wala pong imposible sa inyo. Tulungan niyo lang po kami makita at maranasan ang imposible. Turuan niyo lang po kami, Panginoon, mangarap, sumubok, kahit minsan aming mga padapa-dapa, kahit minsan, Panginoon, malulubog. Turuan niyo po kaming sumubok. Kasi Panginoon, mas mabuti pang sumubok maglakad sa dagat kaysa manatili sa loob ng bangka na walang magbabago sa aming pag-unawa sa inyo. Walang magbabago, Panginoon, namin Ama, sa aming karanasan kasama ninyo. Kaya, Panginoon, tulungan niyo lang po ang bawat isa. Sa aming paghiwa-hiwalay, punuin niyo lang po ng grasya at pagsinta ang bawat isa. Sa aming pagbalik sa mga trabaho, eskwelahan at bawat na ginagawa, gamitin niyo lang po ang aming lakas at panahon. At sa aming pagbigay ng mga ikapo at handog ng pag-ibig, nagpapasalamat po kami sa pagkakataon na makiisa sa inyong kaharian at sumuporta sa inyong gawain. Salamat po. At gusto lamang po namin ibalik lahat ng papuri at pagsamba dahil kayo karapat-dapat ng bawat isa. Sa iyong matamis na paan kami nananalangin, isang Diyos magpakailanman. Amen at Amen. Samahan po kayo lahat ng Diyos and God bless.
Thank you, Coach Pipo.